Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the EFL Fantasy Podcast. My name is Angus,
My name is Dan.
and Jamie's decided he's too busy and important to be on the pod tonight, so it's just the two of us. We are here to sort of review, do the post sort of game week 11 pod, obviously. We're still doing the new format, but we will sort of cover, obviously, some of the key topics from this game week. But first things first, how are you, Dan?
Yeah, not bad. Uh, Played home advantage this week. We'll get into it in a minute. Pretty decent game week in most fantasy games. Yeah, and Luton lost, which is a bit of a downer. So yeah, it was better last year, weren't it, when Luton were winning 1-0 every week?
Yeah, exactly that. Obviously, slightly different for me, at least in the live football context. We're recording on Sunday night. I'm not long back from watching Arsenal beat Man City, which is obviously a big positive. But I have also had a good fantasy week, and I'm not sort of saying to some of these people with low scores that maybe you should have been nicer to me, but look at your scores and how horrible you were to me, and just reflect on whether that might be related. Uh, but in terms of the scores this week, I'll sort of go first so that I can then get to the pod team. So I aborted my plan to play home advantage. As people know, I am not the biggest fan of home advantage, which it took actually coming to playing it to realise that I wasn't to remember that I wasn't actually that big a fan of it. But it was also that I decided, particularly, I'm not sort of getting reckless with it, but at my rank, one of the higher sort of upside plays of something like midfield dynamos was probably a better play for me than the additional sort of like, I guess, security of home advantage. So I ended up rolling a transfer as well. So I've got two for after the break, which I'm quite happy about as well. But I got 73 points this week. Still managed to select the wrong goalkeeper. I had Hladky for one, O'Leary got three, but I had Drame for 10. Ayling got on right at the end of the Leeds game for one. Davis for 8, Somerville for 10, Smodix, who I would have benched if I had played home advantage, started him. He got me 13. Dewsbury Hall Vice only got me 4. Jack Clark 1, Rutter 5, Adam Armstrong captain for 10, and Broadhead for 10. And in terms of bench points, Dembele 2, Hume 2, and Giannoulis 1. So big change around for me this week. But that was another green arrow. I'm up to 736 now. So the greatest comeback in fantasy football history is still on. But Dan, how did it go for you this week?
Yeah, I played home advantage. I got 93, so for you to only be 20 points off, having not paid a boost, like you said, good game week for you. Um, I had two free transfers. I got Adam Armstrong in and Jordan James for Sarah and Godden, which wasn't terrible, I don't think. Um, I had Key for one. Kakai played him. I gave him a chance, and he got benched. So that's it. He's never playing again. I should have just not played him and played Stacey, who got 10, who's first sub. Manning 9, Leaf Davis 12, James 15, Somerville 15, Dewsbury Hall 4, Clark 1, Piero. It was Piero's week. I got 13. Adam Armstrong 7, and Broadhead. So glad he started when I saw the lineup 15. So that was a green arrow up to 40 seconds. So that was a 60 place green arrow. So yeah, that was encouraging. Although I've now used all my boosts, so I'm a bit of a sitting duck until the next set of boosts start. But yeah, ranks seem really close this year.
Yeah, there's some real swings still to be had, I think, and obviously it's still relatively early, long time to go. But I do think as as well. Even at the moment, certain players hauling can result in big swings as well. So I think it's quite fun in that respect, particularly for someone like me that's quite low down, where it can change quite quickly. In terms of the pod team, you had the funny element in Thursday Night Wars of all four teams played home advantage this week, but our home advantage was the best.
Yes,
Um,
get in.
we got 93 points on home advantage. So we bought Kyle Walker-Peters and Wilfred and Diddy. We had Hazard 6, Ayling 1, Walker-Peters 9, Davis 12, Somerville 15, Dewsbury Hall 4, and Didi 10. He came off the bench and assisted. Uh, Clark 1, Pirro 13, Armstrong 7, and Broadhead 15. So obviously that went quite well for us. And yeah, that got us the win this week. So
Have a
the
boost.
hmm?
Just have a boost, don't
We've
we?
used
Yeah.
2 boosts in the pod team, so we have another one to go as well. Looking around, um, the community team has 2 boosts still to use. Man on have 1, and guys on Gaffr have used all theirs. So I imagine they'll sort of just be hoping for um, to sort of navigate it the remaining weeks and hope that the boosts fail. But yeah, so good week for us and a win again, which we hadn't won for a little while, so that was quite nice to see. But we'll move on sort of into the action from the game week. So Dan, if you want to start us off with the key lineup news.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, as it was the third game of a 3 week, game week, there was some key news. Stansfield for Birmingham played up front. They had played some games on the wing. Um, for West Brom, Dean Garner was in for Thomas Asante. Um, they kept with Wallace through the middle as a striker. For Borough, Greenwood was left wing and Smith was right back. McGree wasn't in. Was he on the bench? I think he was.
I don't think so.
So that's why he missed out. For Watford, Loser, Ince, and Rakovic were benched. Martins returned. Uh, Coventry, Godden was benched. So that worked quite out well considering I got rid of him. Wright and Sims started up front. Norwich, Giannoulis was benched. Ipswich, Broadhead started, which a lot of managers were happy about. Preston, Fokir Yankson started, as did Will Keane. For Leeds, Ayling was benched again. For Leicester, they continued to rotate. Faz, Mavididi, and Didi, Justin, and Vardy were all benched. Iniacho started. For Hull, Connolly was benched. For Plymouth, Aziz was benched. For Swansea, Timon played left back. QPR, Kai was benched. Blackburn, Rankin Costello seems to be playing centre mid the last couple of games. And Southampton, Adams was in for Alcaraz, um, and they couldn't win the match. So yeah, that's the
Mm.
main team news this game week.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of chaos around for some people. A lot of people also glad that they sold certain players after some of this news as well.
Yeah.
So it was a mixed bag for people. But yeah, we'll get into some of the sort of our points, the key sort of points from this week. And one of them that I wanted to talk about, I've sort of been talking or mentioning it for the last couple of pods, but I just wanted to get into talking about Borough. So obviously, I sat and watched Sunderland Borough on Saturday lunchtime, and with the obvious caveat that the sending off just before half time obviously changed the context of the game. I did think Borough were edging the game before that. But obviously they've been on this nice little run now, and I think it's worth sort of noting that this is sort of the results catching up to the underlying numbers. After this weekend, they did boost things slightly, but I think before the weekend there was something like fourth or fifth in XG and about 12th in XG conceded, and all sorts of numbers for shots and shots on target and big chances. They were sort of relatively high and everything. So this has been sort of, for lack of a better way of putting it, an accident waiting to happen in terms of Borough going on a run. But I do think there are players that are key to this. And I just think it is something that's going to come onto the radar for people with Borough if they do keep playing well. So there's some interesting things to note from this. I think the two main men that stood out from this game were Isaiah Jones and Sam Greenwood, who were the two players sort of playing on from the wide positions. Isaiah Jones, for a few games now, looks like he's back to his best. We talked, I think, in the summer about the podcast appearance he did where he talked about his mental health and the issues he'd had last season, and how some, including Michael Carrick, had really helped him with that. And I think we are seeing him getting back to his best, which is really pleasing to see for someone who's had those sorts of difficulties off the pitch too. He looks like he's really enjoying himself. He's, all the sort of flicks and tricks and turns and taking on players, is back. I felt sorry for Jensen Silt, who came on at left back in the first half. Actually, Huggins got injured, and particularly in the second half. I just felt sorry for him. Jones was just eating him alive. And it's difficult for a player like that. I think he's a centre back by trade as well. And Isaiah Jones is one on it is one of the worst sort of propositions to be sort of out there up against. And Sam Greenwood on the other side did look sharp. He's started the last couple, I think, and he did look good again. Very nicely taken goal. Sort of couple of shots. So I think he's one that will interest some people. People are obviously familiar with him. They did go with him at times in FPL for Leeds last season. I think he's another one who can take set pieces. And so I think he will be of interest for people. Obviously, I've mentioned Isaiah Jones. Do have to mention Matt Crooks. Chipped in with a goal. Not the strongest Alan Shearer celebration. I appreciate him doing the Alan Shearer celebration, but it wasn't the strongest. But it's a good finish from him. Coburn started up top again. So if that's going to be a thing, that's potentially very interesting from a Gaffr point of view. Because in a team that is as good in attack as they are, if we've got a starting striker at 5.9, just to throw into the mix with the Plymouth and Ipswich guys, it suddenly becomes very, just another interesting option, I think. Defensively, it's also improving a little bit in terms of, conceding goals or not, as the case may be. There's been a little bit of rotation around, so wouldn't necessarily go with them. But for those people still on Dieng, I think that is something that is improving. And he actually made a really good save from Patrick Roberts in the first half of this game with his foot at 0-0, which was vital for them. So I do think, it seems like it's all sort of coming together in the results as well for Borough. And so I do think there's a number of options there. It'll be interesting to see also whether they stick with the Barlasser and Hackney midfield. I think we've sort of talked before, particularly with Lewis O'Brien being injured, that this is the sort of best midfield for them. And it looks to really be working for them. So whether they stick with it or whether Johnny Howson does come back into the team at times remains to be seen. But yeah, I was impressed with them. I do think, obviously, like I say, the red card just before half-time dramatically changes things. I'm not going to get too much into debating the second yellow card because we've had sort of Tony Mowbray a reporter saying what Tony Mowbray said, which is probably what Dan Neil said, which is feels harsh for for a second yellow, particularly in that sort of situation. But given that Dan Neil seemed to be saying more to the referee than the quote Tony Mowbray gave, I'm not 100%, but it does feel like it was probably harsh. He could have had a word with Dan Neil and sort of, calmed it down. But there was strange refereeing on both sides. Isaiah Jones got booked in the first half for an excellent tackle tracking back. He had two or three actually really important defensive tackles to stop counters. But it was one of these where the way he got his foot on the ball, it could only have been him. And yet the referee called it a foul and booked him. So it was a little bit strange from the official, but I don't want to get too far into that. But I was impressed that Borough actually tried to put Sunderland away after that. After one or even after two, it would have been really easy for them to sit on that, but they did keep going, and so from that element, I was quite impressed with that and did appreciate that. Even though I know Sunderland fans obviously won't, but you often see teams just sort of sit on that, and occasionally it comes back to bite them. They go 2-0 up, they sit on it, they concede a goal, and all of a sudden it's a bit of panic. But the fact that they kept going and put them away and got the job done was another positive sign for me around Borough. So I just think they will start coming on the radar for people. Obviously with this sort of really good run of results they've put together. And so I just thought I'd just talk a little bit about them, particularly because I'd finally had the opportunity to sit and watch a full game of them. Don't know if you have any particular thoughts on Borough at this point, Dan.
Yeah, I mentioned in the group chat, I think last week that I was intrigued to see Borough for a full match. I've not been able to get round because obviously Luton were playing at the same time. So um, yeah, I like that those players. From last year, some of them, the main ones like Jones and McGree, how well they can do. I mentioned Coburn last week about one of these cheap strikers that could do well, and yeah, I think they're on the radar. The next few fixtures, just looking at them: Birmingham at home, Norwich away, Stoke at home, Plymouth away. So you wouldn't say any of those teams are great defensively. So could be a chance to get on them now, maybe. But it's so hard, isn't it? Because there's so many good midfielders this year. A lot of people have Dewsbury Hall, Clark, Sarah, and at least one Leeds mid. Like, do you take the risk of going off of one? And my fifth midfielder is James, and I just can't get up to anyone. So I'm gonna have to make a decision if I want to borrow player. But yeah, they're definitely starting to put away some of their chances. Notably, they've dropped Sammy Silvera and Morgan Rogers, and that seems to have helped.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely on the radar, uh, especially if you're lower down the rankings and need to make up rank. Sorry, Angus, I know you
Yeah,
are, but
no, no.
it's
I'm
it's
comfortable with
definitely
being an
players.
example of this.
They're definitely like players that could haul and move up pretty quickly with low ownership. Shall I move on to my
Yes,
topic,
sorry. If
Angus?
you want to sort of go on to your sort of first point from this.
Yeah, sure, no worries. So I've only picked one key topic this week, and for me, it's similar to Borough, a team that have won four in a row, and that's Swansea. Like Borough, they were struggling at the bottom of the table, and they've both gone on a pretty decent run. So in the last four games, Swansea have won four of them, scored 11, and conceded two goals. And in three of the four games, they've scored over uh, an XG of over two. So they're not like a fluky wins. they deserve to have scored pretty much this amount of goals that they have been. Um, I looked into some of the players that have been getting goals and assists, and it's pretty spread. But um, Lowe has scored 3 goals and an assist. Yates has scored 2 um, and won a penalty. You've also got um, 3 assists from Jamie Patterson, um, 3 assists for Matt Grimes because he's on set pieces. And I'll just mention one more. Key, a lot of people had Key at the start. He's now starting to contribute. Um, he's got a goal and an assist in the last few game weeks. A decent price at 5 million. Um, it's interesting. They've pretty much settled down to a back four now. Although some of the sites seem to think it's a back three, I'm pretty sure it's not when you look at the heat maps because there's no way Jamal Lowe is playing left left wing back. But they're pretty much lining up with Rushworth in goal, Key right back, Darling and Humphreys centre back, with Timon at left back. Although they at times I think they've been playing Humphreys at left back, and I think Woods and Cabango have been injured recently. Grimes and Patino are sitting, and then they have a front four of Cullum, Patterson, Lowe, and Yates. So that's quite an attacking front four, all pretty different with pace and power and creativity. So it looks a lot better, and they seem to be getting used to what Duff wants them to do. Obviously, they've had to change from Martin's style of play, which is completely different to practically anyone else around. So I just think Swansea are a team to maybe keep a lookout. I know that their next game is Leicester, so it's it's probably not the best time to jump in, but they do follow it up with Watford, Blackburn, Sunderland, um, and Ipswich, and Blackburn, Sunderland, and Ipswich. They just attack, so there'll be goals, especially for the attacking players in there. Uh, have Swansea been on your radar recently, Angus? Because they've, like I mentioned, good run of results.
Yeah, I mean, I was a bit annoyed. I sold Key on my overhaul, and that was when he was supposedly injured, and then it turned out he wasn't injured.
Yeah,
Um, they've obviously sort of struggled a lot with injuries to players.
yeah,
But I've spoken about Patino before, who I've got an eye on anyway. But I do think that they are one. Obviously, I've sort of had an eye on because they do have a number of players that I like. I've spoken about Jerry Yates before, and I think Jamal Lowe
yeah,
is a good player as well. But I think the fact that particularly the first game week back, I don't want to go on to them, gives me another
yeah,
week to think about it. But yeah, I think a few of them, particularly the likes of Key, like I say, Patino, Lowe, Yates, they'll all be considerations. Particularly, as I said, I'm not going to go wild with it, but it is a potential to. It's another potential spot to differentiate from people and potentially
yeah.
gain there as well.
Even Matt Grimes, like he's gone 3 assists. He's going to be on set pieces, so we know how well the key passes are with the bonus. He could end up doing pretty well.
Yeah,
He's a decent price at I think about 6 million this year, so it's not terrible.
yeah. I think they are one that sort of deceptively have quite a few options, and so
Yeah,
particularly after the Leicester game, as they started to get to some of these games, they're not the easiest, but there are players that can be on your radar in those as well.
yeah. I think maybe it's more. I'm not sure I'd want key for those games,
Hmm.
but like for a low or a Yates, I think they could do pretty well. Maybe one of those Patino and Grimes are pretty cheap as well. Even Patterson, like 2 years ago, Patterson was one of the top scorers in midfield. So if he gets back to that sort of form, what 6.4 could be a decent
6.4,
option
yeah.
as well. Yeah, so yeah, I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
with those two teams, Borough and Swansea, I think maybe a few people are thinking it's getting a bit template, and it's like I mentioned, it is hard to go away from Leeds, Leicester, and Sunderland, but I think if you want to take a gamble, maybe Borough and Swansea over the next, I don't know, 4 to 6 weeks could be interesting. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and so the final point that I just wanted to cover before we get into the questions, just to cover it off now, is quite a few people have a boost left, and there's been lots of stuff about what boost to play and when and that sort of thing. So just wanted to do a little bit. I'm just going to sort of talk about the next sort of 4 weeks very briefly, because those are the only weeks that you can play it in, and some potential players for the boosts in those weeks. I'm not going to talk about overhaul. I'm not going to talk about goal fest, and I'm not going to talk about home advantage because I think most of the people that have played home advantage or that are going to play home advantage have already played it. So it'll be primarily focused for me on triple, midfield dynamos, and park the bus. I think people can identify with goal fest. It depends on your team, but like good weeks for your attacking players or not.
Yeah.
It's probably going to feed into some of these similar weeks, but for the purposes of this, I'm just going to focus on those three boosts. So I think in game week 12, you've got. I know it's away and it's different, sort of slightly different fixture, but Ipswich are playing Rotherham. You've got Leicester playing Swansea, who have improved, but Leicester in any week, that's not necessarily the worst game either. West Brom are at home against Plymouth, and those are going to be the main ones I think if you're looking to play a boost. Maybe something like Borough against Birmingham at home um, could be another one. But I think that you could potentially do a triple if you've still got that. It's not necessarily the best week for it. Is the one thing I would say there. Particularly coming off the break, you don't know, but like Dewsbury Hall any week is viable for a triple. John Swift went off injured against Birmingham in the Friday night game, but if he is fit, we know in terms of Plymouth's away record, if he's fit for that game, that's obviously a nice fixture for a triple there. And then like you could have a Broadhead or a Chaplin or even a Davis, and it's in game week 12. So I think the triple there is something that you can go with. There's some of these teams with tougher games that will probably put you off a Park the Bus or a midfield Dynamos. Leeds are away at Norwich versus Leeds. In
Do
terms
you
of
think that could be end to end though, Angus?
it
For like
could
a midfield
it
dynamo.
could it's sort of two ends of the same thing in terms of it. It could negatively affect the midfielders or it could be good for all of them. So I guess it's
Yeah.
just how you feel about that. But yeah, that's totally fair that it could actually end up being a decent game for those on looking at something like midfield dynamos. Southampton are away at Hull. It's not necessarily the easiest game, not necessarily the worst game. It's sort of one of those where it just depends how you look at it almost, but it's something that would probably sort of sway me away from something like that. Sunderland are away at Stoke. Now we don't know exactly how Stoke's sort of defence in particular will look after the break, but it could be a nice game for someone like Jack Clark.
Yeah.
So there's that element, both from a potential triple point of view and from a midfield dynamo's point of view. And if you have someone like Trey Hume, not necessarily the worst game, although I do think Stoke have a decent record against non-Leicester teams of getting something sort of going forward from games. Game week 13. There's a few sort of interesting games that potentially influence whether you would play boosts this week and what you would play. So you have Leicester against Sunderland. Now most people are probably on Jack Clark. That probably limits your desire to play midfield dynamos. Sunderland are also a decent defensive side. Don't let the drubbing against Borough, where they lost their only sort of defensive mid, sort of sway you on that. I think it's not necessarily the best game for the Leicester guys either. Norwich are at home against Middlesbrough. We've just talked about Middlesbrough. I don't think that's necessarily the easiest game, particularly if you're on someone like a Stacey again, talking about Park the Bus. Don't think that's necessarily great either. Ipswich are away against Bristol City. Don't think that's the worst for them if you were looking at a boost involving them. Southampton are away to Preston. Not massively convinced by Preston, even though they did all right this weekend. So I think it's something where, they got a couple of goals against Ipswich anyway, but where you could maybe you wouldn't necessarily put off playing a boost against them. West Brom again have QPR at home, so depending on the fitness of John Swift, but park the bus with something like a Leif Davis, a Darnell Furlong. If those are the sorts of players you're working with. Some people are on like Cody Drameh. I don't think Hull at home is the worst thing, because I think particularly with Birmingham, I'm not sure. I think I'd somewhat fancy them in any home game. So I don't think that's terrible for them. It's just how you would sort of navigate around that, but it sort of shows that there's just enough games there, I think, that make it a less good week. Game week 14, I think, is the week that most people who haven't played a boost will be looking to play a boost. And there's a number of reasons for this, and it feeds into triple, park the bus, and midfield dynamos. So you've got Ipswich play Plymouth at home. We've talked about, again, Plymouth's away record. That means, at least in theory, it's a good week for Davis, Broadhead, Chaplin, Burns. That's a decent fixture. Whether you're playing triple, midfield dynamos, or park the bus, there's coverage there from Ipswich. Leeds play Huddersfield at home. I think that's a decent game for them. Huddersfield, their performances have been fine under Darren Moore, but Leeds at home against Huddersfield, you'd fancy them to do well in that. Again, not necessarily defensively, because unless you're on Pascal Strauch, for example, you're probably looking at Leeds at the moment. I mean, Luke Ayling can't even start when theoretically all his competition is out. But midfield and attack, whether you've got Somerville, James, Piero, Rutter, that's a decent fixture for them, I'd say. So again, midfield dynamos, triple. Leeds may well look to play a part of that. Leicester play QPR away. Another one. Whether you've got, Fast got left out this weekend, which I think threw some people. But you would assume he comes back in. But that's another sort of, I guess, wait and see. But particularly if you're on someone like Ricardo Pereira, that feeds into a park the bus. And then midfield dynamos or triple. You've got Dewsbury Hall, you've got Mavididi. I don't think it's the worst thing if you've got, or if you're looking for a cheap midfielder, Wilfred Ndidi. He even came off the bench and got an assist.
Yeah.
And I think some people by that point may well, whether it's having a clearer idea or punting on one of the strikers. They both got a goal this weekend. And when it comes down to QPR, are you willing to accept that you might get the one that gets, sort of 70 minutes, or you might get the one that gets like 25 minutes? Either way, you might get a return. It might be clear at that point, but it just sort of shows midfield dynamos, triple. They're another team that feeds into that. If anyone's on Borough by that point, they're at home against Stoke. Don't think that would be the worst one, particularly for something like a midfield Dynamos. If you did go on to Jones or Greenwood in particular, even someone like Matt Crooks, depending on how it's looking at that point, could be useful in that sort of fixture. Southampton play Birmingham at home. That probably leans more to a Park the Bus, a Kyle Walker-Peters or a Ryan Manning, but you could sort of include on a more so triple, I guess, if you had someone like Adam Armstrong. I think that's the majority of it that week. You could maybe throw in a couple of other guys, but I think that's the main sort of thing. Game week 14, maybe you like if you're playing looking to play midfield dynamos. If you've got someone like Sammy Smodics, I don't think a home game for them in particular is the worst. Even like Swansea, I know have improved, but I think Blackburn home games still decent for someone like Sammy Smodics. So I think there's lots of options that week, which are particularly for the bigger teams, which I think will lead people towards playing a boost that week. And I think, as I've said, you can see sort of on balance, depending on how they're playing at that point, where you can find something on Park the Bus, midfield dynamos, or triple. And then the last one is game week 15. Obviously, this is sort of tight to the change around, but it might be that people just sort of, get to that point and have a boost left, or sort of fancy sort of leaving it to game week 15 for whatever reason. In that case, there's sort of one obvious game that creates an issue there, which is Leicester Leeds.
Yeah.
That's sort of the obvious thing that jumps out as a potential issue that week. Now, maybe you can gain against it if depending on the players you have, particularly if you wanted to play, say, Park the Bus. That's one where maybe that leads you to feel slightly better about benching an attacker, for example, or losing a captaincy there, because an attacking captaincy there, because you don't necessarily like having the players from that game. So maybe that's where it fits in with something like that. Norwich play Blackburn at home. I think that's a decent game for them. Sunderland play Swansea away. Southampton play Millwall away. West Brom play Hull at home. Plymouth play Middlesbrough at home. So even though they've got a good home record, that could be tough for them. Ipswich play Birmingham away. We haven't really mentioned Coventry in all of this. They do, for example, play in game 13 Rotherham away. So I mentioned briefly about Park the Bus being a possibility that week if you have someone like De Silva. That could feed into that. But yeah, so it's tough. For game week 15, there's nothing much that jumps out in terms of sort of boost wise. Maybe, like I say, maybe something like Park the Bus, but maybe if you had like a Bristol City defender against Sheffield Wednesday, if you had sort of Leif Davis any week, a Southampton defender, that sort of thing. Maybe like a Darnell Furlong and someone else you could play a Park the Bus that week, but yeah, there's a couple of clear issues there as to why game week 15 doesn't necessarily appeal for a boost. But just wanted to sort of cover that off, just to sort of highlight some of the things the games you might be looking at in each week, and thus the boosts it might lead towards. I don't know if there's anything in particular you want to add on that, Dan.
No, not really. I think you covered that pretty well. Just
This,
make sure you play all your boosts.
Yes. So two points of housekeeping following that. One, make sure you play all your boosts, absolutely. Two, this will be what I refer people back to now when they ask about, particularly those questions about, when should I play, triple, and on who or whatever. I will now be referring you back to this podcast because we have covered it. So yeah, so that's sort of that. So the one thing left for us is to do the questions. We've had 12 questions in. So thank you to everyone who has sent us a question. And I will sort of ask them in no particular order, and we'll both sort of just give our thoughts on them. So the first one is from FPL Frog, and he says, after his superb headed finish at the weekend, could Ben Gibson be the solution to Norwich's striker crisis in the absence of Barnes and Sargent? Now, Dan, I don't know if you've seen Ben Gibson's header. Um,
Yeah, scared, wasn't it?
it was the planting a header like that into your own goal is very Grant Hanley esque. So it's like he's never been away when you get Ben Gibson doing that.
Second coming.
Yeah. So just you wait for some point in the new year when it's Grant Hanley and Ben Gibson together. Double jeopardy.
Yeah,
Kyle Gaffers asks, should Jamie follow me for tips? You can debate in any given week whether Jamie should be listening to anyone or no one.
he doesn't really listen to anyone, to be honest, does he?
No,
He's a bit
there are times where there are times where he won't listen to anyone and he'll just do his own thing, and there are times where if you mention an idea at the right time, he'll decide to do it even if you don't really mean it, which is always good fun. But he also asks, in a serious question, are we doing a Gaffer in real life charity match like the annual FPL North v South one at some point this season? Don't mind organising it if enough people are interested in playing or watching. I have no idea. I know that a lot of organisation and coordination and practice and selection and Twitter politicking and whatever goes into it, and I haven't really thought about it, to be honest. But I know Jamie's involved in the sort of north-south game, so whether he'd want to be involved in another is another matter entirely. But yeah, it depends. I guess if there's enough sort of support for it. Um,
have to dust the old boots off,
yeah,
don't
I was
you?
about to say the last time I sort of actually played football, it's been a while. I'd need a decent run up to it to sort of uh, get
I probably need
sort
to
of
get sore my
re-familiarize
hernia
myself
out.
with it. Start stretching now. um, FPL Shaka Zulu has asked, are Swansea and Middlesbrough the real deal now? If so, who are the three best assets to pick from them? We're going to leave this question because, given the content of the podcast, I think this question has been answered. FPL Calypso has said, Highland, 63 points on home advantage, nightmare. What's the way forward when you're struggling to make gains? Go against the template? So I think we've talked a little bit about this. We've disputed the idea that there's a real sort of template, but I think everyone has sort of probably 6 or 7 of, if not the same players, similar players. I think
Yeah,
there's somewhat of a disagreement among some people about whether they have sort of the Norwich guys at this point, but particularly a Leeds midfielder, Dewsbury Hall, Clark, a Leeds forward, Davis. That
forehead.
yeah, Broadhead for a lot of people. So I think there's that sort of makings of it, and some people have gone more against it. Some people have gone completely with it. It's probably I guess we've sort of hinted at it. I guess you'd say it's sort of taking punts against that, but being sensible with those punts as well.
Yeah, like you
Yeah,
don't need to change a whole team. I'd say probably get 6 or 7 of the key players and try and jump on and off, maybe like a striker and midfield spot, like be aggressive with them. So try and like get a solid team that you're happy with, and then maybe punt, but mainly just striker and midfielders. I think you can make a lot. up on points, especially if you're willing to punt them, because you do have like the vice where you can sort of fall back on if, say, if you feel like a Piro's going to smash it, or you're worried he will. You could sort of put the vice on him and then gamble on the captain, where you
Yeah,
don't
I
lose
mean,
too many points, really.
yeah, I mean, you look at something like this week, for example. I mean, I know part of it was home advantage, where I'm now on Smodix, which he's
Yeah,
not the most owned player and everything, like in terms of versus other people. I've sort of then gained against everyone else by having, or the majority of people by having Sammy Smodix. If you find those sort of opportunities to go against, you can gain. I've had Cody Drame, for example. In
yeah,
the last sort of 3 weeks, I think he's had a 9 and a 10. It's that sort of thing. It's recognizing these points to just be able to go to players, and they don't necessarily. I think it's also recognizing you don't necessarily have to buy a player for a long run. If you look at a 3 game stretch, like I mean, it's like you would in other games. If you look at 3 game stretch, it's like actually I want a player for this 3 game stretch, and then I will sell him. Do that too. Be sort of
yeah.
proactive. I think is the key there with all of these
The
things.
thing where people are struggling is obviously you've got try and fit in the boost, so people are
Yeah,
sort of changing to get players in, which is probably making it become a bit more template because everyone's wanting the same sort of players for the boost. Whereas hopefully when we start going into the maybe into the next set of boosts, because you've got a whole another 15 or 16, I think it's 15
15.
game weeks, you sort of have a bit more um time to plan, where some people will play the boost straight away, some people will wait a while. So yeah, hopefully something like that happens, or just like an injury. I
Yeah,
know we don't want to see an injury, but say if Dewsbury Hall got injured, would you go to a Leicester player? Are you going to punt that somewhere else? That'll be interesting.
it's an
Or
interesting question. Yeah, actually. Given that I keep mentioning him, maybe the answer then would be Wilfred and Diddy. Uh,
has the answer ever been Wilfred and Ndidi?
well, apparently this season it should have been. Who knew? Uh, he was just being misused before. He had to be recast as an attacking midfielder, and all of a
Can you
sudden,
imagine when if they go back up and you've got all the FPL, won't believe it that Wilfred and Ndidi's a box to box
yeah,
midfielder now.
Wilfred and Diddy attacking threat. Yeah, I don't think he's quite on the first page yet, but he has sort of, for example, he has 1 point fewer than Dan James this season, Wilfred and Diddy. So
Yeah,
there you go.
there you go, main man.
Yeah. Uh, Petteri Annanen has asked us if you would overhaul now without budget restrictions, which 11, assuming 3-4-3, would you choose for the starting lineup? So for the starting point, if you were overhauling now, which goalkeeper would you go with? That is in as your starting goalkeeper.
I'm not sure. I haven't thought about. Do you know? I haven't looked at the goalies
I think I'd probably
since
go Hladky for the moment until he loses his place. You can either go with like sort of
he's
one of
just
the 4.5s to back him up, whether it's someone like an O'Leary or a Rushworth or whatever, or the 4.5 ish, because I know O'Leary's like 4.6. Maybe one of those guys to back him up, but I think for the moment you'd go with him or Hazard, just as like until they lose their spot.
yeah,
Which, whichever one. Maybe I'd go Hazard because I'm more likely to want 3 outfield players from Ipswich. So because
yeah. I
having
agree, mate.
Hladky has cost me that a couple of times, and it's like sort of just uh, not sort of boxing myself in by having Hladky. So if you were going to pick 3 defenders right now, particularly if there were no budget restrictions, who would you be picking?
Well, I think Davis has to
Yeah,
be. I do like Cody Drame. I've been wanting either Laird or Drame the whole time, and I've just never got round. So I'm a bit especially as I know what Drame can do. in Gaffr. We saw it last year, and especially with Luton. I'm not sure about the third. Might go Pereira for Leicester. He looks like he's going to play, doesn't he,
Yeah,
Angus?
yeah, he's the one that's secure.
Yeah,
And the other one for me, just particularly looking at the moment, is Darnell Furlong because they have Plymouth home and
two nice
QPR home in
games.
the next two.
Yeah, although he's a bit rash, and he loves the booking
Yeah,
Furlong, doesn't he?
and Mr. Sitter.
Well, yeah,
But yeah, it's that sort of thing at the moment where it's picking these sorts of players out. But yeah, midfield four. Who would you be looking to go with right now?
it's hard. I think it's hard to go away from Dewsbury Hall, Clark, and I think Somerville's really good. Even Rowe at 4.9. You've sort of got. I don't have him, but it just seems silly not to have him. And then I think you could just punt the other one, Angus, where
Yeah,
you'd go from like probably 6 million to maybe 8 million and just take a punt fixture wise, which with what you were saying a few minutes ago.
yeah. So I think whether that's someone like a Dembele or Miyoshi at Birmingham, whether that's Smodix at Blackburn, whether that's one of the sort of Middlesbrough guys, whether that's sort of Jaden Philogene at Hull, all these sorts of players, and you just sort of you could move that around. I think if I were overhauling at the moment, a part of me would be tempted to punt against Jack Clark just because he's got a couple of those tougher games coming up, but I would still go with him because he's even I think it was in the first half against Middlesbrough. He was really quiet for about 20 minutes or so, and then he sort of burst into life, and it's just that sort of he can make anything happen at any
It's
minute.
on pens as well,
Yeah, so
and
I think I'd have
when
to go with him.
they got so many tricky players that
Yeah.
they don't need much to get a penalty, do they? What Clark, Roberts, Bellingham, a lot of Pritchard, a lot
Mm.
of tricky players. So
I'd
yeah,
probably be looking at sort of Clark, Dewsbury Hall, Somerville, and just because he's returned big for me and I love him at the moment, I'm going to say Sammy Smodix. But as you say, I think that sort of spot is where you could sort of take a punt depending on how you feel about certain players at any given moment. Like if you felt particularly good about Wes Burns at the moment, for example, that's a perfectly good
yeah,
pick as well. In terms of front three on overhaul,
yeah. I think probably one of the Leeds lads. I'm on Piero. I just keep going back to he's got 20 goals the last 2 years, and I know Rutt has done very well recently. And I know you're saving 1 million, and like I don't hate anyone saving that million, but it's proven, isn't he, Piero?
that being said, if Rutter doesn't miss from about a yard on Saturday, we're probably having a different conversation at this point.
I don't know. I like Piero.
Yeah, but
I think
yeah,
probably an Ipswich forward. It's going to be boring. I'm still not convinced with Adam Armstrong.
no, I'm not.
I think I would have one of the Leeds, one of the Ipswich, and then I would punt similar to that fourth midfielder maybe on fixtures.
Yeah, I think if I were overhauling now and sort of really it depends on your position as well in terms of how much you're going for it. Because like I'd go Rutter personally. I know you'd go Piero. I'd go
Yeah,
Broadhead of the two, Ipswich, but
you
it's
would go
really
Broadhead.
close. It's really close between
Yeah, I'm not
Broadhead
sure.
and Chaplin.
Yeah, he seems to have niggles though, doesn't he, Broadhead?
Yeah,
Even at Wigan and Sunderland, he's had niggle that it's starting to put me off him.
yeah,
I,
but it's really
I,
close between
it
those
is
two if I were
close, yeah.
overhauling. Um, I'd I'm if I were overhauling, I would punt Kelechi in Nacho.
How can you though, Angus? Because Far in the last 3 game week, Vardy played twice.
Yeah, I'm just going with the Leicester forward that basically I think is better. But um, I'd if I looked at it and I was like, actually, I think it's going to be Vardy, I would go Vardy. But I would go for it with a Leicester forward personally. But
If one of them got injured, what would happen? It's because Tom Cannon's injured, isn't he,
Tom Cannon
at the
is still
minute?
injured. Daka is still there, but
He's not
Maresca clearly
playing, is he?
doesn't like Daka.
I heard this contract thing. He gets more money or something.
Possibly, but it's also clear, like as in I've seen Maresca talk about
Yeah,
Daka a couple of times. I don't think he thinks much of him. So if one of those two got injured, I think I would very quickly, and I think a lot of people probably would very quickly get into the other one.
yeah.
But yeah, if you're wanting a little bit safer, whereas I would be willing to sort of just punt it and go for it. If you want something a little bit safer than that, actually, I think right now, if I were overhauling, Broadhead and Chaplin.
Hey there.
I'd overhaul with both of them. You can potentially then move off one of them depending on how you feel, and maybe Broadhead
Yeah.
picks up a knock, or maybe Chaplin gets injured or whatever, and you can shift that. But I think at the moment that's something I would be looking at, or one of the Coventry guys. If you can, it depends who you like. Probably not Matt Godden, but if
Oh,
you
I had a nightmare with that Gordon.
if you particularly like either Ellis Sims, who's obviously turned it around a little bit in terms of his performances, or Haji Wright, then that's the medium pick where I've got the sort of the safe and logical is the second Ipswich, the medium pick is sort of the Coventry guy, and then the real punt is Leicester forward. um,
Unless you Danny, who'll get in
oh, Aaron
Connolly.
Connolly, of course. Although he was benched, so
Yeah.
maybe it's not Aaron Connolly. FPL Clem has asked us, "Hi guys, long way to the next deadline, but I need to bench one of Sarah, Somerville, Mavididi, or Broadhead. Any
Oh,
suggestions?
man.
Sarah, Somerville, Mavididi, Broadhead." I'm gonna say Mavididi just because of the greatest likelihood that he is also benched by Leicester.
Yeah.
Whereas the other three, fitness permitting, will all play for their teams.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So that's sort of my logic for that at this point in time. Uh, FPL Calypso. No, I had that question. So clearly it's shifted around slightly. The FPL will never stop us. Do we stop breaking our teams to play boosts as they never seem to pay off? Keep up the good work, chaps. Um, Depends. I think the because our logic, at least for Home Advantage 11, was that you didn't need to do that to your team.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I think it's one of those things you have to balance, don't you, in terms of whether you want to, how much you want to just rip up your team for 1 week, or
I think it
um,
depends on the boost,
yeah,
right? So, like, I know we haven't had it recently, but if you get like a follow the leader, that would- or triple, or away days, or budget buster, some of the points you can get like 200 odd, especially in a double, 200 odd points. You sort of have to. Whereas, like a home advantage isn't worth ripping up your team, um, and some of them aren't. Yeah,
yeah.
I
And
think
so
it depends
yeah,
on the boost.
like some people who really had to sort of tear apart their teams or really shift their teams for Home Advantage this week, are probably feeling a bit worse. Some of the people who
Yeah,
more had it fall into their laps are probably sort of feeling less bad about it. It just sort of depends, from that perspective as well. So yeah, and then FC has asked, with Norwich looking shaky, is one of the Middlesbrough replacements a good replacement for Sarah? I mean, maybe
no,
if you're looking to make gains, but
yeah,
like I've obviously talked about wanting the Middlesbrough mids, but I don't have Sarah, so I'm
I don't
probably
have
the
Salah. I just sold him.
yeah, so I'm probably in some ways the wrong person to ask because I've looked at a couple of weeks where not having him has sort of gone against me, and a couple where it's not been so bad. Um, but yeah, I think Middlesbrough mids are certainly, as we said on the before, on the table. Whether that's in place of Sarah is a bit tougher. Um, so it depends how sort of like almost bold you're feeling, how aggressive you're feeling. Um, Ollie Ash FPL said, "Who's the best Leicester defender to replace Ayling? Was going for fast but saw he was benched."
I don't know. It's probably Pereira, isn't it? But well, you done all the minutes and everything, and Faz hadn't missed a minute, had he?
I think he'd
Until this
missed
week.
one game, like he'd been unavailable for one game or whatever, but
Yeah,
he'd played every minute of every other game.
it's interesting because there's 3 points between Pereira and Faz, but Pereira's point 0.5 more.
Yeah, I think I would if the fast benching hadn't happened this weekend, I would have been saying, "Oh yeah, fast no brainer." Um, whereas now it feels a little bit more complicated. I'd possibly still be inclined to get fast, but um, I'd be a little bit uneasy after that benching. FPL Villa Villain is really enjoy the podcast. Keep up the good work, lads. Thank you. So they've used triple triple and home advantage. What is the best last boost to use? He said thinking midfield dynamos or goal fest. So we talked about the weeks and the boosts used, but in terms of other than triple triple and home advantage, what do you think is the best boost to use?
I think this year with the midfielders and how well they do on bonus, I think I'd be wanting midfield dynamos because you get like Clark, Dewsbury Hall, Sarah. They basically don't have to do anything and they'll get bonus. So
Yeah.
yeah, you don't even need goals. So yeah, definitely midfield dynamos for me.
Yeah, I think that's the thing for me. Obviously, I've got a boost left to play. I've not played home advantage, um, but I'm not going to. I obviously had to overhaul and played not park the sorry, I played triple triple. So I'm sort of working out what else, what am I going to play, and I think it's overwhelmingly likely for me that it would be midfield dynamos. Yeah, so I guess that's my recommendation because it's what I'm doing myself. So
Yeah.
I clearly think it's the best idea for at least from my perspective. Now, Fairbrother has asked, who do you prefer for their next run of games, Somerville or Sarah?
Oh, that's really hard, isn't it?
And play each other. I'm going to say
Thanks.
Somerville. Um,
Yeah. Although Sarah's nailed, isn't he?
yeah,
Somerville could get
yeah. I mean, I think
rotated.
Somerville is just going to keep playing as much as possible, and obviously he's on a lot of like set pieces and everything. But yeah, it's that's a really tough question.
Especially as Leeds to have Leicester in the 15.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, then after that they play Plymouth and Rotherham.
Oh no.
I'm going to stick with
Speak.
Somerville. I really like Somerville at the moment.
Yeah,
And so I think I'll go with him narrowly. I just want to throw that in there, that just in case Sarah's the better pick. But I also think it's close. FPL Commander with our final question saying, Ayling, time to go from my or anyone's team. Yes.
it has to be now. I can't believe it. He was doing so well in Gaffr. He made people pick him, even though they hated him.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the fact that he made me pick him and then has been left out. Although, to be honest, he's actually done a really nice job for me recently, because there's been a couple of times where I've got some nice bench points from him not playing. So I can't be too harsh on him. But yeah, I think like Shackleton playing there instead, like that was one thing. We'd seen him do that even for Millwall, play on the right side of the defence before, so that wasn't totally unheard of. But when even Shackleton's out and he's still on the bench, it's sort of like, and they're
Yeah,
playing Archie Gray at right back instead. What are we doing here? Let's
yeah, yeah. Who's a kid?
yeah.
Like
Um,
that shouldn't be happening to
no, I mean maybe uh, Daniel Farker watched him try and control the ball and out for a goal kick multiple times against QPR and decided, no, I can't do this. Uh, so yeah, so I think he's probably a sell at this point. Whether that sort of frees you up another Leeds attacking spot, or whether you sort of go with um, sort of another defender, it would probably be the safety of someone like Strauch or Byram. Actually, I'll pose this as a last question to you, Dan, because it's popped into my head. If someone really wanted to go for it, what do you think of the Piero Rutter double up front?
I don't know. I don't hate it, but Bamford's back, and that's a problem.
Yeah, I just thought I'd throw it in there as a question. It just came
I
into my
don't I
head
don't hate it, but unfortunately, Patrick Bamford is back.
for now. If Patrick Bamford gets injured again, then maybe it's back on the
So,
table.
so
But yeah, it was just something that popped into my head when I was thinking about freeing up the extra lead spot, and it was like, could you do that? Um, but yeah, maybe that's the real punt if someone's overhauling and wants to go for something different. Maybe it's going for both of them.
yeah, I don't hate it.
Um, but yeah, that's all the questions we've got this week. Thank you to everyone who has sent us a question. Um, Please like, subscribe, give us 5 stars, all that good stuff. I don't know whether we will do anything in the international break. That is to be confirmed. Obviously, the next set of games are 2 weeks away now. So maybe enjoy the break from fantasy football. Obviously, there's international football, although I know some people don't bother with international football. We'll certainly have something, I would assume, before the resumption, just to cover anything off. But I mean, we might not, but we might. We'll let you guys know what we're going to be doing content wise. But yeah, thank you for listening and goodbye.
Goodbye.